Right. It is 5:31, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome back, everybody, to Tigard Charter Review Committee meeting number 2. I'm excited for our agenda and getting into the really substantive work that we're going to be doing. We do have one new member who has been appointed since the last time we met, Zachary Claremont. Yep, our youth representative slot is filled once again, which is exciting. So just because he wasn't here and we're all still getting to know each other, I'd like to preempt the agenda with you as allowance and just do a quick round of introductions. So similar to how we did them last time, I'll just go and call on each of you. And if you could just start with your name that you prefer to be called, your pronouns. And this time, let's talk a little bit about how long you've been a member of the Tigard community. So I will go ahead and get started. I'm Kim Ezel. I use she, her pronouns. And I started working for Tigard as a consultant in 2020 and did that for a couple years, and then got to join the Tigard team officially in December. So I'm still new to being officially on the team, but I like to think I've been a member of the community for going on 3 years now. And Shelby, why don't you go next?
All right, I'm Shelby Rahala. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the city attorney. I have been with the city as their in-house attorney for 5 years. And then 4 years before that, I was their contract attorney. So I have almost 10 years combined with the city from different perspectives.
And Jesse?
Hi, my name is Jesse Raimundo. Use he, him pronouns, and I've been with the city. I'm the deputy city recorder for the city of Tigard, and I've been with the city for a little over 1.5 years now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. And our new member, Zachary.
Hi, I'm Zachary Claremont. I'm a youth representative, and I've been with TIAC starting senior year, and I really just kind of want to get involved in the community.
Thanks for being here. Derek Lawson. Oh, sorry, Derek isn't here. Karen Emerson.
Hi, Karen Emerson. I use she, her, and I have been in Tigard since 2005.
Thank you. And Lindsay Washburn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Washburn, and I use she, her pronouns, and I moved to Tigard in 2019.
Margaret Doherty.
Okay, I'm Margaret Doherty. I've actually lived in Tigard 30 years. I moved here actually in about 1990. And since then, I've been involved in the Planning Commission, been involved in some other city things, was a state representative for 11 years, and now I'm trying to retire the second time, and it's not working.
Well, we're glad you're here. And Nathan Jackson.
And Nathan Jackson, he, him. I've lived in Tigard somewhere around 15 years. I think between 14 and 15.
And Jason Snyder.
Hi, Jason Snyder. I use he, him pronouns, and I have lived in Tigard about 23, 24 years.
And John Cook. I don't know, I think we might still be having some technical difficulties there. Carol Krager.
Yeah, I'm Carol Krager. I'm the city recorder here at Tigard. I've lived in Tigard for 33 years, and I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you, Carol. So we just had somebody join us on the phone. John, is that you?
No, this is Tony.
Tony, great.
Sorry about this.
No worries. We're all introducing ourselves with our names, preferred pronouns, and then just how long we've been a member of the Tigard community. How about you go next?
Oh, sure. I did this last time, but we can do it again. My name is Tony Simpson. I've been in the area, Lake Oswego, Tigard area for over 20 years. And my day job is I work for a compliance and cybersecurity company, and my title is facilitator because I do just about everything. So that's it.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, we do have a new member tonight, so we're just redoing the introductions.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, and I'm sorry about this. I'm connecting from my home instead of my office. I'm passing through my office computer through VPN, and so I have a mismatch of technology going right now. So I apologize for whatever hardships that causes for this.
We'll do our best. And how about Holly Fenton?
Hi, I'm Holly Fenton. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for the Tigard Municipal Court, and I've been here for a little over 5 years now.
Holly. And Zena Pinto?
Hi, I'm Zena Pinto. I go by she, her pronouns. I moved to the city recently. It's almost a year now.
Thank you. And Derek Lawson.
Hi, I'm Derek Lawson. I use him pronouns, and I've been in Tigard for a little over a year. And for work, I'm a financial planner.
Thanks, Derek. And then John, are you able to hear us or speak?
I think we're working now. Perfect. John Cook, former mayor of Tigard, lived in the area. It's about a week away from 63 years. So
not very long at all.
No.
Definitely our shortest tenure of a member. Great.
That means it must be your birthday next week.
yeah. Karen, happy birthday to Karen. Hers is closer.
Oh, happy birthday, Karen.
This is fun.
Thank you.
I did want to say, unfortunately, Councillor Shaw isn't able to join us this evening. She had a prior business trip scheduled, but she's going to try to join us later on, if possible. So she will miss the early meeting. And then just a couple quick reminders, this meeting is being recorded. You can see the little red record button and it will be posted publicly like our first meeting was. And then please continue to raise your hand before speaking as we get into some of these topics. It'll help keep the conversation running smoothly. You can find a raise hand depending on your version of Teams. There's either a little symbol that looks like a little hand that you can click, or there's a symbol that looks like a smiley face that says react. And if you click on that, one of those options will be a raised hand. Looks like Team has updated even since our last meeting with some new options, but do try to use that raise hand. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shelby, who is going to start our conversation about some options we can go with our direction of the charter.
All right, thank you. So tonight is our first opportunity to really jump into the substance. So you have before you the charter review and broad concepts form or handout. So that's really what we're going to be working from. So the first section is the charter structure. So I think we discussed last time, there seemed to be a general consensus, but we want to make sure that the issue is done and finalized. We are rewriting the entire charter rather than just amending pieces is our first part. So just want to make sure that there is consensus on all of that first. Is there any concern with that assumption?
Margaret, please.
I think it's more of a question than a concern because it does appear to be quite dated. But the charter, other than maybe some amendments that people have voted on and dropped, the charter literally has not been reviewed or done since the early 60s.
Correct.
Early mid 60s. Okay.
Yes.
Then I would be for rewriting
it. And John, please.
My concern is what the voters would feel about it, especially the ones that passed the special aspects of different aspects of the charter that they put something in that they didn't want. But I'm still for changing the whole charter. You just asked what my concerns were.
Thank you for that. And we will, anything that this group doesn't decide to change will just move fully from old charter to new charter unless there's a change that's agreed upon in this group.
Yeah, and to John's point, that it is going to be a balance to think about is if we're getting this passed as one measure, it will have one bite at the apple. So whereas if we do it in segments, we could put easier controversial or less controversial stuff in one and pass it in several measures. I think the result of that could be a disjointed charter that doesn't necessarily flow together and make sense. But from the political perspective, you have more bites at the apple. So that is a something to remain mindful of in this process.
Thank you. And Jason, please.
This at this point, it's probably not that important. I was just going to acknowledge that Mayor Cook's point is more of a political one, I think, and I'm sure he agrees, but just for those that are maybe not as much in the political world, that's really a political issue and it could be a sticky one. And city attorney's suggestion there could work. I would not favor that approach, but it could work if that becomes there becomes a lot of sort of political beefs around a few points. That could be a way around that.
And Lindsay, please.
And then maybe like a technical question just in terms of the process. Let's say that it gets comprehensively reviewed. We have a new charter, the councilors agree to it. And so then it goes into the book, you know, and how it's written up. I'm thinking about myself as a voter. If I'm coming to vote on this, I'm assuming there's some kind of narrative around the fact that the charter has been updated because it hasn't been, you know, comprehensively reviewed since 1962. And we, you know, thought it'd be better to look at the whole document together. You know, is there any kind of explanation just for the layperson as like, why am I voting on this? Because I think that's compelling to say, yes, we are comprehensively reviewing this charter. It was a long time ago, 1962. You know, and for me, it would make more sense to look at the whole document rather than, you know, pieces of it kind of a thing. So just a kind of technical question there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the ballot title, when you get your voters pamphlet, it'll have everything that a usual measure will have in it. So it'll have the ballot title, the summary, and then an explanatory statement. And so, yeah, in that, we'll definitely want to remind the public that it has never been comprehensively updated. And to say that it hasn't been updated since 1960s or since the 60s, that's actually incorrect. It was written in the 60s. So it has never been comprehensively updated. It was written, amended twice.
Even stronger point.
Exactly.
And then beyond just the voter pamphlet, we also have a public engagement plan for as this work is concluding, including doing like what I think we're calling them charter chats towards the end of this committee's work. Karen, please.
Just looking at the amount of kind of sorting and consolidating that's going to go on for the elected officials and city officers sections. I love the idea of going the comprehensive route, and then if there is something that could be a hot topic, separating that out possibly, but I can't imagine doing all the different amendments just for those two sections that we're going to be doing.
Good point. And Margaret, please.
Okay, and then lastly, in fact, Kim, actually you addressed it, is that the one thing Tigard has done very well is communicate with the voters and the people who live in Tigard, and given them an opportunity to go through and input and find out and ask questions and so on. So the community engagement part is very important, and you're always going to have kind of your, you know, doubters and that kind of thing, but at least to give people the opportunity to ask questions and get their issues involved. And sometimes with they've got issues that are not city charter issues. So we make that very clear.
Thank you, Margaret. And Zachary, please.
So I just wanted to say that it is an honor to be part of this committee, and I really appreciate all this like new knowledge, because I'm not 100% acquainted with, you know, how the Constitution came to be and, you know, the history of it. but I really do think that it is important to make sure that each issue that we talk about extensively, so that we weren't, to, skip over one too fast or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that we will keep in mind. I know we have a shorter timeline, but we do want to make sure we have time for all of our conversations. I don't see any other hands, so I would welcome a motion to vote on, it sounds like the consensus really is to move forward with rewriting the charter. Does anyone like to make
I was
that?
to say, did anyone suggest differently?
Great. Shelby, do we need to do a vote?
We don't, no. I think, oh, Carol has a comment first.
Yeah, if we do get to a sticky issue, could we pull one or two things aside and give people options?
We can definitely talk about that at the point. Yeah.
Okay, we may not reach that, but if we do, that might be a way to not lose the whole thing because of one controversial thing we do. Okay.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, so we don't need a vote. It doesn't sound like there's any opposition, so we will move forward. And Shelby, if you want to go ahead and start talking about or introduce the shell, and I do have it pulled up, so if there's anything that you want me to share screen on, let me know.
Okay, yeah. So one of the documents that you received was a shell. So we were thinking that it's helpful to see things in context, and this is the document that we'll be filling in as we finalize language. And so the document that you have is, you can see kind of the organizational structure of it. This is a structure that we thought made sense and flows better. One of the things that we've talked about is that right now the charter is kind of disjointed in places. So like powers of the mayor appears in 3 different sections. And so that makes it hard to locate when you're looking for information, and it just doesn't flow in a way that makes sense. So the charter shell is organized very similar to both Beaverton's new one as well as the model, but trying to simplify it, make sure that it flows better. So the thought was once we develop language that we will put it into the shell so that you can see in context what it looks like. And so this is the outside frame of the document, and then we'll keep building on it as we go. So the document or the language that you have in there right now is the stuff that's really not going to change. We're not going to rename the city. We're not going to change the city boundaries. So that stuff is really set as is. So if you have any concerns with the way it's written, Karen did point out that section 9.2 had a stray shall in it, which we will discuss in just a second. So I do want to note that that has since been removed. But this is the document that we're going to be working from. And so you'll see it get longer each week as we come up with the language. So this is, unless there's any concerns, I can explain anything. I think it should be pretty straightforward the way it's drafted right now. But this will be kind of how you see things as we build upon it going forward.
Okay, I need a clarifying question. Are we talking about just number 2 under the charter structure? Are we going down the agenda?
Yes,
So
yes, we're just on number 2.
Definition shall, which in debate terms used to be ought to, but not necessarily will.
Yes.
Which means
exactly.
Kim, you were muted when you just said that.
Sorry, you may have heard the fire alarm going off in my kitchen. Nathan, please.
Yeah, I had kind of maybe a minor question, but some of the language in the first 2 articles it's mostly taken from the LOC template, I think, does not use Oxford commas. some of the language in, I think, Article 9 does, and I wasn't sure, do we need to be super consistent on Oxford commas? Personally, I'm a big proponent of Oxford commas, but.
Yes, that is a great point. I am a fan of them too. So yes, I will make sure for consistency, yes, even commas do matter. And so yes, we'll make sure that those get reconciled.
Punctuation consistency.
Yes.
Thank you. And Zachary, please.
So I know you said that city boundaries and all that are not under discussion or anything like that, but I was wondering to what extent is that the way it'll be? Because now that there's like Mountainside High School, I go to Tualatin, and I literally live like less than a mile away from Mountainside, and Tualatin's like 10 miles away, and that's kind of how it's written up. So I was wondering if there's anything like clarifying about that. Maybe.
Yeah, so the city's boundaries won't change. So school district boundaries, annexations will automatically be factored in. So there is a process by state law where the city can add land from unincorporated county and it becomes part of Tigard. So that's all built into what the charter says right now, because that's all a process allowed by state law, but nothing else will change. So the boundaries of the city will not change.
Zachary, I think what's important for just to point out for your sort of thinking with that comment and question is that the school district boundaries are not directly related to the cities at all. In fact, all the school districts, for the most part in Oregon, all existed before most of the cities. And so there's a pretty, in many areas, including the ones you're describing, there's a potentially a big disconnect between those, and it's disappointing for people because it sort of breaks communities up, et cetera. But that's a discussion we could talk probably more offline about, but just as and Karen Emerson, former school board member, former Mayor Cook, myself, we would all be happy to chat with you about it. But unfortunately, kind of the way it is, unless some other changes were to happen.
Yeah.
Thank you. I see Margaret nodding as well.
Yep, same thing.
And Karen, please.
I have a feeling the phrase is a legal phrase that was kind of discussed in the NCL thing. But the part where it says, and other enactments consistent with this charter, consistent seems like such a squishy word. So I'm kind of surprised that that's the word that is used, because it does seem like there could be a lot of interpretation as to what is consistent or inconsistent. But I have a feeling you're going to tell me that that's the legal term that has to be used.
So it is a legal term. So which section are you looking at?
9.1.
Sorry, yeah, 9.1.
Okay. Yeah, so we do want that to have a lot of flexibility because that section basically means unless there's a serious conflict, everything remains in effect and this charter doesn't disrupt that. And so we do want it to be pretty broadly interpreted. So if we come up with a word, it should be something erring on the side of vague, broad, a lot of authority. So I'm open to suggestions, but that is the intent with that section.
Any other questions, comments with regards to the proposed shell? Heard two requested changes. One, removing the case of shall, and then the other, just comma consistency, both of which I'm confident Shelby can tackle. Jason, please.
I guess I want to open up the possibility. I can't imagine now what it would be, but I want to open the possibility that there could be an article topic area that we're not thinking of right now. I mean, I don't know what it would be. I would think most of what we're working on is already there, but I guess I don't know where we're going exactly. And so I hope we're open to that kind of a modification, right? I mean, the shell can still be somewhat flexible.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other reasons why it's organized the way it is, leaving off with miscellaneous provisions, is the ability to add new ones down the road. I think one of the really confusing things about the way our charter is structured right now is that the Willamette River provision and the transit provision actually fit under the title of urban renewal, and neither of them have anything to do with urban renewal. So we want to allow flexibility for the future. So yes, whether it be this group or a public initiative down the road, we do want to keep it flexible.
So I think if you came up with a new Article 9 that we have not thought of yet, and we bump the numbering orders, that would be fine. Any other comments?
I just put my hand back up, sorry.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure if it was still up. Go ahead, please.
So based on what was just being said, I'm wondering if there should actually be a separate article on how we handle citizen and basically referendums or citizen initiatives.
Yeah, so that's an Oregon Constitution provision that says that charters can be allowed, or charters are amended by citizen initiative. So if there's any other requirements, we can see whether that fits in line with the Constitution, but that is a constitutional provision.
Sure, the fact that they can happen, right? But we could set up information about how and the way, like, for example, what made me think about this is we could say that sections of the any community initiated referendum would appear in this section of the charter, or must appear in the charter section that it is most appropriate, or, you know, like things like that is what I'm getting at. I don't know what exactly it would be, but it would be sort of specifying how it must be done procedurally and where it would go, and maybe prevent some of the chaos that we've had before.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion too for a future topic as well. We've had some suggestions. I know Nathan brought one to our attention about wanting this group to discuss how maybe future charter review committees are structured and their frequency. And so we were talking about doing a lot of that kind of at the sunset of this committee's work, just because as we've worked through some amendments, it might make a lot more sense to then talk about how future amendments are then made at that point. So I will note those both down as future topics. And then when we get to them, we can talk about adding a different article or putting in miscellaneous provisions or how we would want to structure that. Does that meet the needs of this group?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Sounds good.
I do not see any other hands. Shelby, does this one require a vote?
Nope, I think that sounds good. We'll proceed with the shell concept.
And make the two changes that were requested.
Right.
Great. Thank you so much. And we are just moving right through our agenda for tonight. So that was topic number 1, charter structure. We're moving into broad concepts, and take it away, Shelby.
All right. So one of the things that this group identified, and I think justifiably so, is that, oh, Margaret, do you have a?
No, keep going. That's the one done.
Okay. Is gender neutrality. Right now it does refer to the mayor as a he, which obviously is not consistent with current practice. So there are options in drafting it as to how it should be written. So I'm wanting to get input from the group in terms of comments on that. So when we refer to a person, do we want to say he or she? Do we want to say they? Or do we just want to refer to the title? So for example, the mayor and the mayor's designee, the mayor and his or her designee, or the mayor and their designee. So I'm open to suggestions, and this will be something, there is no specific place that we're looking at. This will just be consistency through the entire document when drafting all the future sections.
And Margaret, please.
I definitely think that it should be done by title only. And the reason is on something like this, it just makes it clearer. We tried to, a lot of people don't realize, and I don't know how I ran into this other than I was preparing for something. In the Oregon Constitution, Article 5, Section 1, they refer to the Secretary of State as the Secretary of State, as the Treasurer as the Treasurer. They refer to the governor as he or him 19 times in the 4 paragraphs. And I tried to get a bill through, but this is something, of course, it has to go to the people. So those things don't make it through committee. But I think it just makes it so much easier just to have it by the title.
Thank you, Margaret. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, I just think to clear up confusion, it'd be a lot easier just to do it by the title. That way, they're not worried about who he or she or him or her is right now. And it's just like, okay, mayor, governor, whoever it is.
Great. Thank you, Zachary. And Carol, please.
I'm in favor of using the title, but you might come across a sentence where it might say, if the mayor this and then the mayor, you don't want to keep putting in the title. Could we start out with the title, and then if it is in the same sentence where it would be used again, say they?
Usually in that case, they use they.
Okay.
Kind of gender neutral.
Thank you. And Karen, please.
I also like the idea of going with titles, and it seemed like I looked at a couple times when the title actually might be person, and I should have marked them as I found them, but just that person might actually be a title or a reference to a person. So, but I like the idea of titles.
Thank you, Karen. And Derek, please.
Just joining the chorus. I feel, Margaret's position and the people prior to me using titles is what I would put forth as well.
Great. Thank you, Derek. And Tony.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think that in the context where you would maybe transition to another word to not repeat the same word, for comfort of reading, that I think it actually is better to maintain the consistency of title, because sometimes when you're writing and you're referring to a they or an it or something, and there's previous sentences, sometimes those subject matters can get confused into that when you're transitioning between sentences and subjects. But if your subject is consistently only referring to a subject matter, especially since this kind of has more of a legal, to me, when I'm reading legal stuff, I don't want there to be any ambiguity of what the subject is, who we're talking about. If it's the mayor, it should end there, and it's only talking about the mayor for the entire paragraph. I still kind of think just saying mayor, 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 it's not pretty to look at. I think it's kind of annoying, but I think just for ease of use and just a complete obliteration of any confusion, I think that consistency would be really nice to see across the document. That's just my take on it.
Thank you, Tony. And Jason, please.
Yeah, we're not going for a book award here. So but in that spirit, I had been thinking about sort of seconding the mayor and the they comments, but as just examples, but that does make me think more. And honestly, the Oregon revised statutes tend to read more like that legalese. Clearly not the part Margaret was referring to in the Constitution, but they can be very annoying to read, but there's frequently not a lot of ambiguity. So, this is something that we need to be able to go to for answers without ambiguity, not something that's going to win a book award. So maybe there's merit to that, just to consider. The comment I was originally going to make was actually to ask about whether there were any best practices that either governmental entities or other organizations that may have a better, not on the legal side, I'm meaning more the, inclusivity side, are there best practices that, or are these the best practices?
Yeah, not that I've come across. I do, Kim and I talked about this a bit when we were teeing up the question. Pronouns are an evolving thing. And so that was one concern we had, is that, back in 1962, there was no thought that he and she wouldn't be the only pronouns that would be in this document. And so I think that in being responsive to the future, whatever that looks like, I think is one consideration. Along with that, they has been typically a plural designation. And so that is a concern that I have also, is that does that introduce any confusion, whether they is representing a singular or a plural? So I also like the use of the title. Just for clarity, I agree with that.
You're saying exclusively?
That I think is my preference.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to all of the comments, but if I were to have a bias, that would be it.
Yeah. I think one of the things Shelby and I talked about is we've seen experimentation of different gender neutral singular pronouns that has come across, and none of those have really stuck in like the national conversation yet, and that may in future change. So just another thought. And Lindsay, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think if we decide we want to stick with title only and be consistent throughout the document, then we keep that in mind, or Shelby keeps that in mind as she's writing this. So if this sentence has the mayor 5 different times, can we rewrite the sentence or put it in 2 sentences? So we're not saying mayor, mayor, mayor. But that's why it's great to decide this now, right? And say, okay, we're going to use title only. So how can we still have this document, that a layperson could, comprehend, but also be, consistent with that and very clear throughout the whole document. And we'll just keep that, as we're writing this together, and give that feedback to Shelby too. I know when you get into something, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. So if we're reading this and saying, this could be 2 sentences maybe because we've said mayor a lot or something like that, but just to kind of keep that as our guidepost as we write this together.
Thank you, Lindsay. All right. Any other comments about pronoun use or title use? Seems to have a pretty consistent consensus around the use of titles exclusively. I see Carol nodding, lots of folks nodding. Shelby, is this?
Nope, I think, well, like Lindsay said, this will be something that you see in all the sections coming forward. So if you have any feedback at that time, I don't think we need to vote on it now, but it'll be something that we include in everything in the future.
All right. Derek, yes, please.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to jump back to what Jason had said, which just he referenced that it's it's a document that we need to be able to look to for information. So clarity is going to be key, and what we really don't want is someone 60 years from now questioning what our conversation looked like and saying that it's a relic of the time that we were going through this. And so the use of titles and just very clear language that's unambiguous is really just going to aid in that effort. So whatever we come up with as a group, if we chose a preferred pronoun or whatever the case may be, we'll be entering into that same foray that they did 60 years ago. So we may as well mitigate that now.
Thanks, Derek. Great. Shelby, why don't you talk to us about shall?
All right. So this is a quest that I'm on with pretty much everything at the city of Tigard. Jason and John have seen my ordinances. I'll typically remove shall as well. It is my quest at the city. So the reason, hopefully you found the articles enlightening. I think shall is a word that from the legal perspective, I think a lot of people think that it sounds legalistic and therefore only smart people use it. And I think what lawyers are seeing is that it is one of the most frequently misused words in legal writing. And so that introduces a lot of unnecessary and confusion and a lot of litigation over the word shall, actually. So minus the one slip that Garen caught, my hope is that we can agree that shall does not appear in our city charter. I think it is easier for lay people and attorneys to read and understand. As the article said, a lot of time when shall is written, it is written and used incorrectly. And so I don't want to, in the hopes of sounding smart, actually make an error. So I think my suggestion is that we take shall out. It is just more approachable for people to understand, and is a word that really is misused and not helpful, in my opinion, and is kind of the direction that the legal profession is taking, with the exception of real property law. If you've ever read the deed to your house or any real property law, that is, as one of my law professors said, that is oldie-timey England there. So jolly old England, he said. So with that exception, we are going to rid the charter of shall with your authority. So are there any concerns with that approach?
Sounds like we shall not use it.
Exactly.
John, please.
Shan't.
Shelby taught me this 10 years ago, and I concur. You know, there's 115 shalls in the current charter, and the two articles were very enlightening. You know, you hadn't shared those with me 10 years ago. You just explained it to us, but reading those articles was very good about shall. You know, you can twist the sentence around backwards. It's the double negative issue that causes people so much confusion. And that's where shall comes into play so much. And reading those articles that talked a lot about that. So I think, to me, it's obvious that we would want to, but you're right. It always was written that way because, I hate to say this, but some lawyer thought it sounded smart. So it didn't mean anything more. I like the aspect, you know, and we'll get into more of this later, but Jason and me both have talked about this a lot in the last 10 years, is ambiguity is good in some places. We actually like to make decisions on a council basis versus being told what we have to do. And so I don't think putting shall in helps that. I think must, you know, when it's something that really should happen, you know, go to must or whatever. So that's my point of view on this one.
Thank you, John. And I really look forward to hearing more about yours and Jason's experiences as mayor working through the charter. I think you'll have a lot of great context. Margaret, please.
I think the one thing, in fact, earlier when I said the debate term ought to not necessarily well, put your glasses on, because I read shell as shell. So, but anyway, but I think what it is the only reason you would want to keep it in is if you had any section of the charter where you wanted to have some sort of, I'm not going to say ambiguity, that's the wrong word, but the idea that something is not set in stone, and so the council can go one way or another way, kind of thing. That's a shall, you know. And but I can't think offhand what it would even be. And I think that as long as you don't have a charter that totally locks the city council and those people into something that they can't use any, you know, outside anythings, then I could agree with dropping shall. But in that kind of case, it's just the idea of it gives some sort of leeway to the city council. That term, that's what that term means to me. Give some sort of leeway.
Thank you, Margaret. And Zachary, please. Oh,
yeah. So when talking about, like, you know, whether you shall or not, may I recommend another word?
Sure.
Okay, I was thinking we could, instead of using like shall, because it's kind of like old timey language, like shall we go to the ball? I was thinking we could do like will, like if we're doing like a council or something, like we will go to the council meeting rather than we shall. It just sounds more professional and modern.
Yeah, so typically, so will or must will typically be the words that replace it, and then may will be the more discretionary term that allows for the more flexibility.
Yeah, because that's what I say with the flexibility of that. That may would be the word that you would use, and which is pretty much the same thing as shall. So, I mean, not quite, but a little bit more.
Yeah. Thank you, Zachary. And Jason, please.
That was the point that I think that Margaret just made is a good one, and the point I was going to make, which is, or similar, which is that there may be times when, like, I don't think we should use the word shall unless that's really what we mean. And I think that the word may is probably the better word in that case to just have clarity there because of how abused shall has become in the legal context. So I was going to say we don't use it unless we really mean it, but I think if we really mean it, we would mean a different word anyway. So I do think we probably ban it unless somehow we really have to revisit it. I just can't imagine what that would be. Something that we would say is discretionary, but using the word may is not acceptable. I just don't know what that would be.
Yes, I understand. Thank you, Jason. Zena, please. Oh, Zena, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. It's just a question. I was just wondering, like, how the new rewritten charters from other cities are like. Do they have shall or they just have getting rid of shall?
So it really depends on the city. So Beaverton's, with the exception of the section that I copied that had the word shall in it, Beaverton's largely does not. Mostly they use will and must and may. The LOC model charter does still have the word shall, but it was written a little bit longer ago than Beaverton's.
Okay.
Well, and as I say, I think it was in there to give the council discretion to do something or something else, as opposed to you have to do it this way.
Yeah, so I think I'm hearing general consensus that we will remove shall unless there is a really strange English sentence that requires its use.
I think so.
Shelby, is that direction for you?
Yep, sounds good.
Great. So why don't you talk to us about public records and meetings and state law and local law?
All right, so we start to get a little more policy oriented here, a little bit more thoughtful as the questions go on. So the third question under broad concepts really focuses on how much specificity do we want to include in our charter versus how much deference do we want to give to state law. So as I mentioned last time, as a home rule city, we have very broad discretion in order to name authorities that we want. We cannot conflict with state law. And if state law says something, we can be more restrictive than state law, but we cannot be more permissive. So one of the areas that this comes up is public records and public meetings. So your meeting guide has a couple examples. So for example, one of the quotes out of our charter is a record of council meetings must be kept in a manner, our charter currently says council shall cause a journal of its proceedings to be kept. So public meetings law and public records law already prescribes what we need to have from our city council meetings. In the state statute, it talks about what the record of the meeting needs to have. It talks about how we keep it. It talks about how long we retain it. So all of that is already provided by state law. So we cannot be more permissive than that. So we have to comply with at least that, but we can put our own additional limitations on it if we want to. So the question is, do we want to? So for example, Beaverton's language says a record of council meetings must be kept in a manner prescribed by the council rules and Oregon law. So that gives council the ability to set any additional rules that are not in charter, because we talked about last time that code is a little more detail oriented than charter, which is the 50,000 foot level compared to the 10,000 foot level for code, and then in compliance with state law. So we have other references in our charter that talk about, there's a couple places where the journal comes up, a couple places where we talk about where notice is provided. So one of the issues, and I'm sure Carol will want to speak to this later on, is keeping up with technology. So when this was written in 1962, we didn't have online posting. And so the notice requirements say that it has to be posted in City Hall. It says that it has to be kept in a book. And that's just not the way it's done anymore. So again, to the point that we talked about last time, is keeping the ability to be flexible in the future and adapt to whatever technology we have in the future. State statute is going to do more of that, not all of it. We still do have public notice that needs to be published in a newspaper, which many of us argue is a little bit out of date and not consistent with the best means of providing public notice. But nevertheless, we do have some things that notice needs to be provided in the newspaper. But otherwise, we're putting notice on our website. Notices are by email. None of that is currently stated in our charter. It is allowed for by state law. So the question is really, do we want to place additional restrictions on things like public notice, public records? Do we want to comply with state law and call it good? And how flexible do we want to be in allowing for future technology? So Carol, I think you would be a great person to start off this conversation.
Yeah, because when this was written, and in a lot of your smaller cities, this is still done. Minutes, ordinances, resolutions are all paper, which could be destroyed in a flood, combined in a book, a journal. And, you know, now we're into the electronic, you know, document management system, where we work with the state, we follow their retention. We've got our, you know, they tell us how long we keep our records. We need to follow all of that. And this whole thing of posting a notice in 3 public places is, well, it takes time. And I don't, you know, it's kind of old fashioned when here we are putting it on the website anyway. So I'd like to see some of that cut back. And certainly we're way ahead.
Do you know how those are ever looked at? Like, do we track? Do we know when the last time someone went to the library and actually looked at some specific thing? Do you know?
No, I don't know. I'm for hanging up an agenda on bulletin boards and posting posting ordinances. But this whole 3 places thing is just really, you know, I don't think anybody looks at them in town hall. I'm just. But that's, you know, that's part of the public notice process. But this whole storage process, we don't keep a journal. We don't keep a book with the votes. We mark them on our forms, and then they're recorded in the minutes. Everything is kept. There's really no reason for this language to refer to journals, books, you know, copies. And even the smaller cities are getting help from the state to get up to speed and get things electronically.
I mean, you want to be in the 21st century?
And you know, this a side note of all this is that, oh, sorry. I just want to say one more thing. A side note, this really serves the public because records are a lot more searchable and available to the public. So it's all a good thing, and it would be great to not be tied to these old words.
Thanks, Carol. And I do just want to ask that the group do try to raise your hand. I know it makes for a more stilted conversation sometimes, but it is a little more respectful, and we prevent interrupting each other.
Sorry.
Oh, you're not the only one. Just a reminder. I know it's hard. Zachary, please.
Yeah, so I'm 100% open to reviewing the language in terms of where to store things, but I think to some degree there should be a storage system that is still like on paper and stuff, or like, you know, more confidential or secure, because my worry is that, you know, if everything's online or like through a government thing, it may not be always the safest, because there are a lot of like new things nowadays with like hacking and, you know, actually being able to access websites like illegally. And I wonder just how secure the government would be if all of its publications were online in this city.
I think, Shelby, do you want to talk a little bit to Oregon public records law and how records are required to be public?
Yeah, so Carol, do you want to first talk about retention? I think to Zachary's point, that might be a good starting point.
Yeah, so the state has determined the retention, the length of time you keep every single public record. And there are some that are not public. Executive session notes, for example, when council goes into a private session to discuss only certain topics that the state allows, those would not be placed in an area where the public could just access them and plug into them. But most records that a city produces are public record.
So in terms of record retention, so there are things that are permanent storage, there are things that are paper to permanent. Can you speak to that, Carol?
Yeah, so, you know, the retention time, if you've got something that's only, we only need to keep for 3 years, like maybe some copies of invoices or something, those would be kept in paper. If we need to keep it permanently, we're going to make sure there's an electronic backup. And it really depends on what it is, but everything's public record. Everything, you know, most things are discoverable or available. You can request public records. So I guess I'm not sure. Your question is the security and somebody hacking in.
Yeah, Zachary, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question was mostly just like how secure it is, because I'm sure like you know that like, you know, having a lot of information about like, you know, the public and, you know, being like part of the city is really like some of it's probably confidential. And so I just wonder like to what degree are we protecting like, you know, our cybersecurity if we were to like put everything online electronically, whether the public is allowed to access it or not.
Well, everything is not online for one thing, and then some, and some stuff, you know, customer data is not published like that.
Yeah, so Zachary, I think there's a couple points I think in your question. So like Carol said, there's most of the information, well, so in general, public records law in Oregon says that it starts with a presumption that records of the government are confidential unless there's a specific statutory exemption that says otherwise. And so things like, you know, my social security number that I provided to payroll when I started working for the city, that's obviously, there's a statutory exemption that says you can't just make a public records request for my social security number. And so those documents are kept confidential. They're not subject to a public records request. There are others that are subject to a public records request, but that we don't keep online. And so we have records like some utility billing accounts. So there are certain parts of a utility billing account that are public record. If you submit a request, you can get them. They're not something that we're just going to post online because they're not broadly available, but they are, if you make a specific request, we will provide them. And then there are things like the meeting minutes, which is really what we're talking about here for purposes of the charter. Things like meeting records, meeting minutes, notices of meetings, handouts received at meetings, all those kind of things. So those are generally posted online and will be kept online. So there's different levels of public records. So what we're really focusing on for the charter issue is what types of notice or record keeping or things related mostly to the city council does there need to be an additional restriction beyond what the state public meetings law already provides? So that's kind of the niche area that we're focusing on. In terms of your question about cybersecurity, absolutely. The city of Tigard is very concerned about it. We have an extensive security system on all of our networks. We have our IT team spends their entire nights and days working to make sure that we do have that. We take it very seriously, both as an employer and as a guardian of public information.
Thank you all for that discussion. And Tony, please.
Oh, hey, sorry. I think kind of in support of what I understood Zachary to be saying, part of the question for me is when it's digitally retained, how is it secured from being changed? Because digital records as opposed to physical records are quite easy to change after the fact. And when you say less permissive or more permissive when you're in that context, does it mean that, for instance, the city charter could be required to have 256-bit encryption, whereas the state standard might still be 128-bit? Or would that be considered becoming more restrictive or less restrictive? I mean, I don't understand the context of that permissiveness. That's kind of a question for me too.
Sure. Yeah. So that means, like if the state law says that notice has to be given 24 hours in advance, we can require 30 hours in advance or 60 hours in advance. We cannot require 5 hours in advance because 5 hours is less restrictive than what the state law requires. So if the state law requires that it be published in 5 places, we can require it be published in 10 places because that's more restrictive, but we can't require it to be not published at all, something like that.
I think in this context, we may be, just to take us back to that 10,000 foot level, talking about what should and should not be in the charter. We may not want to get into the details of the cybersecurity system that is generally governed by policy within the city, but we're still at the level of meetings and recordings and public information. And Jason, please.
Yeah, I want to apologize for my interrupting. I'll try to do better. I won't promise that I will, but I'll try. My comment in this space is that I think this is something that's evolving relatively rapidly and will continue to evolve. And for that reason, I think the state and the legislature will probably be able to be more quickly responsive than we're going to be able to be in a charter review process. And so I don't like to delegate lots of things to just what the Oregon law says, but this is a space where both record keeping and public notice requirements, I might be willing to go there. I guess that's my working proposal to the group to consider, I guess I would say.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate your recommendation. And Zachary, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to appreciate everything that everyone said. And yeah, I understand. I wasn't trying to get in the nitty gritty details about it. I was just trying to give my, opinion about what I thought might be of some concern when we're talking about this, because the last thing I want to do is like overlook something, and then what happens is later, they go back at it and they're like, oh, we need to change that, because our ideal goal is to not have to review this Constitution again for a while.
Appreciate that. And this is going to be an ongoing conversation, I think, that we have as this group about what is the appropriate level of detail for this committee. And so it's just going to be a recurring theme. And Nathan, please.
Well, I'm going to skip a few things because other people brought them up, but I was just going to say that in general, I think I would support deferring to the state law in this case. My one concern that Mayor Schneider kind of touched on was, what if in the future the state starts failing to keep up with where things are going? That was kind of my one big area of concern.
So Nathan, would you be supportive then of language similar to Beaverton's language that says as the state law or as city council deems?
I think so, yes.
Thank you. And Karen, please.
Yeah, I'm a yes to the question that you just asked. That the public meeting law and public records law are plenty detailed and thorough enough that I can't imagine we would want to be more stringent in deferring to the law, and stating that we're deferring to law and the council rules just makes a lot of sense. And I like the word record instead of journal because it's consistent with the recorder and their job. Yeah, I like the sentence in quotes.
Thank you, Karen. And Derek, please.
I think we're kind of getting into the same area, which is like, for purposes of public record and retention, it's likely that the state law is probably fine. But to take us in a slightly different direction, I would ask, what is the state law for public notice, and do we differ from public notice requirements, and do we want to differ in that way? Like, would we like to be more, I guess, outspoken about city business? I think that one of the common themes is that people in the community sometimes don't feel as engaged. I was just reading the Tigard newspaper, a couple of days ago, for example, from some of the new council members who were talking about, as they were going out and canvassing the different neighborhoods, that people generally liked the direction of the city, but didn't know how engaged they were necessarily in the process. And so, like, is that something that we would want to focus on as a group on? Maybe public records and retention is probably fine, but as far as public notice, something that we would want to incorporate. And I don't have the answer to that, but I just wanted to put that forth and say, is that something that we all as a group might want to consider?
Thank you, Derek. And Zena, please.
Okay, so the sentence is like, a record of council meetings must be kept in a manner prescribed by the council rules and Oregon law. That's what I see there. So
Yes.
instead of prescribed, is that word mandated looks better there? Or do they mean the same thing, prescribed, mandated?
Shelby? Oh, Shelby might be frozen. I do think that those are treated as synonyms, yes. Okay, so we have a couple, we do have another note. Does anyone else would like to comment on Derek's question that he brought to the group around making a more restrictive ask of the city around public notice requirements? And Karen, please.
No, I would not want to address that at all. And I'm looking forward to when they do change the language away from newspapers, that we would just be able to make that change without having to change anything. Without having to change any language, but we could just, the day that they accomplish that, then it'll be able to be immediately implemented.
So not to put words in your mouth or anything, but do you consider the text around or council rules to be sufficient for anything else that Tigard may want to do when it comes to public notice?
You mean like versus council ordinances, or?
No, versus versus saying just by Oregon law or saying by council rule and Oregon law.
I see the distinction. Yeah, if council came up with a reason that they did want to be more restrictive, then having both in there makes, oh God, that's inconsistent with what I just said.
No, that's okay. I put you on the spot, but that's, thank you for humoring me.
Yeah, I think I like having both of them in instead of just Oregon law.
Thank you, Karen. And Margaret, please.
I also like the idea of having both because I think there are different situations where state law might be, I'm not going to say too restrictive, but it could, you know, hamper some things. And not only that, but dang, we tried to get that newspaper thing dumped 5 years ago and 6 years ago and 8 years ago. And I think it might be a lot easier now considering there's no newspapers hardly in print anymore. But that is half of the Portland Tribune. That's most of their income. And part of the reason, you know, why they wanted to keep it in newspaper print was because, and it was the same sort of thing of people going bankrupt and you know, sales onto houses foreclosed and so on and so forth. Part of it was income. But anyway, that's aside. But I think it's the idea of having both, and that way it gives the city council some sort of not leeway, but at least whatever would fit the best for the city of Tigard at that time, they would use that. And not, probably 9 times out of 10, they're going to use state law. So,
thank you, Margaret. And John, please.
Yeah, I like the idea of both. But in response to Derek's question, how would we want to be more outreach or inclusive with everybody? I think adding a number to, you know, have more than what the state requires. I get the point of wanting to be more inclusive and outgoing, but I think that the council could make that decision versus actually putting in the charter. I don't like the idea of putting in the charter. I think it's for each thing, it could be changed along the way as the council felt necessary or as they felt it was needed versus putting in the charter. Some of the very outdated things, and Shelby will laugh at these, and Jason knows exactly what I'm talking about, but some of the outreach has to happen via a sign in the yard. And the sign in the yard gets removed, they get torn down, people graffiti over them, they change the words, they take up another sign and put over that sign to make it be what they want it to be. And that all is related to how it actually happens before it can go to the planning commission. And all of those things happen every day. And it's something I don't want to have a sign in 5 yards versus 1 yard. You know, I understand is maybe your point is maybe we do it on 3 or 5 different social media platforms. We put it on our website. We put it, you know, in any published thing that the city does. I'm okay with the more that we do, but to actually have a physical sign that has to sit in somebody's yard that everybody goes up and on purpose changes it or tears it down happens way too often, and it's terrible.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your passion. So what I think I'm hearing from this group is that there is a preference basically for future proofing that comes down to the context of asking to follow generally Oregon state law, but also having a provision that allows for council rules in addition. Great. Oh, and Derek, please.
Yeah, just back in response to John, I think he's hitting on what I was talking about is putting things out on social media, but you know, leaving it flexible in a way that we're not stuck to something antiquated like a newspaper, for example, but just making sure that we're cognizant of the fact that, you know, we want the community involved, and is there a way or a mechanism for us to do that through what we're doing now? And if not, you know, if we table that for just council business, that's great too, but mostly just as a topic of conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Derek. And Margaret, please.
okay, and lastly, and this is just kind of a little shout out, is that in the years that I've lived in Tigard, probably the last 3 or 4 years, the communication and the types of communication and the frequency of communication to the people in Tigard has really increased. And, you know, whether it's your communications department or whatever, whether it's email, whether it's the website, whether it's Facebook, whether it's direct communication, whether, I mean, I have to drive by the City Hall reader board because I've got to see the dad jokes that are on the reader board. I mean, that sort of thing, but it also goes through and talks about the coffee with a cop and meeting with the mayor and city council meetings and so on. So I think that at least at a high level, Tigard has really improved the communications to get things out to people in the last couple of years. So.
Thank you, Margaret. Shelby, does that give you the direction that you need?
Yes, yes. So we will stick with allowing deference to state law and the ability of council to adopt more prescriptive rules. One of the other things it was asked about notice. Different meetings have different notice requirements. So the sign on the property that John was referring to is specific to land use cases, but in general, the notice requirement is 24 hours for a meeting of council, and then an emergency meeting can be held immediately if it is actually a legitimate emergency. So that will be the standard that we are going with. It will just defer to state law, but just so that this group knows those are the general timelines for how much advance notice is required for a city council meeting.
Thank you, Shelby. And then, so we are at 6:50. That concluded what was officially in our kind of schedule that we'd set out, but we did also send information about ordinances in case we were wrapping up a little early, and we are. So with all of your permission, I think we should just move on into ordinances. And then I'd like to reserve the last 10 minutes of the meeting to talk about kind of next steps in our schedule going forward.
All right. So ordinances.
Oh, sorry, Shelby, sorry to interrupt. Margaret just raised her hand. let her get her. Oh, you're good. Okay.
All right. So ordinances are the laws for the city of Tigard. So those, like we talked about last time, are basically the equivalent of state statutes, of Oregon revised statute. So right now, an ordinance is effective 30 days after its passage. So council votes on it. They say yes. It's signed. I sign it. The mayor signs it. Carol signs it. And then 30 days later, it goes into effect. So that 30 days is set by Oregon statute. And so again, we cannot change it to be less than 30 days. That 30-day time frame is really there to allow for a referral. So if the public was really unhappy with what council had done, it allows them to gather signatures and refer that measure or place it on the next ballot as in a referendum. So there is that requirement in state statute that it be 30 days unless it's an emergency. And the statute does say it has to be a health, life, public safety emergency. So Tigard, we rarely do them, do emergency ordinances. Sometimes we will if we need to like comply with a state law that's going to go into effect immediately. We need to pass something by emergency to make sure that we're not out of compliance with the state law. We have done that before. Sometimes we've done a land use ordinance by emergency because of something to do with, again, compliance with state laws, usually one of them, compliance with something to align the zoning, or we have conflicting timelines that we need to stagger and line up. So we do them very rarely, but we do emergency ordinances from time to time. So the first question is, do we want to keep the 30-day enactment, or is there the desire to go to be less lenient? In other words, make it a longer enactment time. So 30 days is the minimum. We could go longer. Open to comments on that.
Jason pretty vehemently shaking his head. I didn't know if he had anything he'd like to add to that. You didn't raise your hand, but it was.
Well, just I mean, we don't. I guess what I would say is the council could choose to make it longer anyway. So as a former member of the city council, I didn't need any more rules than, like, I didn't need more prescriptive requirements around, like, you never know when you're going to need this to be different, but there will be a compelling reason why in 2032. And whoever's on the city council then will be like, well, crap, we can't do this now. You know, like, it's just, we don't need more stuff like that. So that's just my opinion, but.
Thank you, Jason. And Margaret, please.
And I can't find it right now because I've got the side by side, but the print's so small I can't see it. But when I went through and looked at that this afternoon, Beaverton had some language that said the 30 days or something else that gave a little bit of leeway in what Beaverton had. And maybe we may want to look at that, because if there's no problem with the 30 days, then, you know, just go ahead and follow state law on that. But Beaverton added a couple of words that kind of look kind of good. So when you find it, just.
Okay, I've got it. Ordinances normally take effect on the 30th day after adoption or on a later date provided in the ordinance. An adoption may take effect as soon as adopted or on another date less than 30 days after adoption if it contains an emergency clause.
Does that seem to be something that is workable for on a council level or not?
I think that's putting into words what I just said, like putting it in legalese of what I just said.
That's what I thought. But anyway, when I looked at that Beaverton language, I thought, so we may just want to look at that.
Great, thank you. So the proposal right now on the table is to essentially adopt Beaverton's language. Zachary, please.
Yeah, I first a little bit sorry from the ordinances. I apologize. I had a phone charger. It was like plugged in, and I accidentally bumped it, and then my screen like. Make sure I phoned in. I didn't want to like interrupt or anything, so I just thought I'd tell you that later. And then yeah, in relation to the ordinances, I think that it is good to allow some leeway, like if there's an emergency clause or some other reason that might be more compelling, because I mean, we should be trusting city council with a little bit more authority in terms of when things can get released, because if it's like a time sensitive matter, then the last thing we want is an opportunity to like have to wait like another like 20 or 25 days if it's like a really important thing like a mask mandate or something.
Thank you, Zachary. And Karen, please.
Part of me was wondering if we actually needed to state the 30 days if it's in statute, because if the statute changed, then we'd have to change, or we might want to change our language. And I was just wondering if it could be similar to what we just agreed on the other one, where we say that we will follow whatever the state statute is.
Good point, because that reference could even change, right, Shelby?
It could, yeah. My one thought on that is that having the 30 days is a handy reference for staff to know when it's going to go into effect. So that is a question that comes up sometimes, especially on the land use side, where we have we have the appeals deadlines, we have different deadlines, and the decision date is different than the ordinance date. So that it's fresh on my mind because that did come up recently, where staff was asking, can you give us clarity as to when the ordinance goes into effect? And so having the 30 days, I think is helpful from that respect. But you're exactly right that usually I'm saying that we should defer to state law and not give specifics in our charter. So this is one instance where I feel like I'm kind of conflicting myself, but I do like or contradicting myself, but I feel like I do kind of like the 30 days.
Karen, did you want to continue?
Sure. I guess I was just wondering if that language could go into an ordinance instead of the charter. That I understand wanting to have the clarity, but it's kind of like putting it in a policy rather than in the Constitution. So that's why I wondered why we would want to put it, just in case it changed.
Yeah, I think the ordinance, I like that idea if we're coming up with other things in the ordinance. I think from my perspective, at least, an ordinance saying that ordinances are adopted in 30 days seems a little short and oversimplified. But if we do want to come up with other clarifications around when ordinances go into effect, I think you're absolutely right that that would be the kind of thing that we would put into an ordinance.
Thank you. And Carol, please.
Okay, I think it needs to be there. I want to see it in the code. I want staff to see it. I want our codifier to know that that is indeed what it is for us in Oregon. And it's also, you know, it is in the ordinance. We do refer to that. So
thank you.
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to have that. Another thing is, could we say 30 days or, you know, match whatever the state statute is in case it does change? I guess a danger would be if that got lengthened and we didn't want to go that way. So anyway, I'm comfortable having it in there. I think it's good.
Thank you, Carol. And Margaret, please.
Okay, and I think, again, listening to what Karen had to say, is the one thing of keeping that 30 days in is the article that you guys sent out. They said the one thing that makes a good charter is that it should be user-friendly and easily understood by the average citizen. So I think if it's kind of in there, then the average citizen knows, oh, if I want to, you know, it just makes it a little clearer to the citizenry, I think.
Thank you, Margaret. I think a distinction here also, I just wanted to point out between the kind of public meetings and records versus we're talking about ordinance enactment, is that we are expecting, I think all of us, that records retention requirements and things will change as technology changes.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if we have the same expectation around ordinance enactment. Might be a distinction there. But excellent point. And Jason, please.
This is kind of in response to comment City Attorney Rahala made, and just something to think about. There may be, I understand that we wouldn't want maybe a single ordinance that just says ordinances are enacted after 30 days. We may find, though, that there's an entire list of things that we would like to put in ordinance because we don't really want them in the charter. We reference them in the charter that sort of come from state law, and we may want to have an ordinance that like covers all that stuff. So I don't know whether that'll come up, but just a concept to think about. Like it may become an ordinance that has to be kind of adopted annually based on review of, you know, current state statutes, et cetera. Like, does this still work for the community? Whatever it is, and I could see this one being in there, but not being the only one. But I don't know, maybe we won't need that. I'm just offering it as a potential concept.
I love that. And as we come up with things, I will go ahead and keep a running list if there are other ordinance recommendations that come out of this group. And Tony, please.
So I'm kind of finding myself agreeing with multiple points that might not all fit all together in this one. I like the 30 days. I think that's a good measure. I also like the idea of referring to the state because that kind of gives it immediate flexibility. If the state now says it's 45 and the charter says 30 or the state, then you get that benefit, but I also like that Beaverton language where it also allows the city council or to make changes to it, because if something's a big enough change and it's 30 days is what the kind of the codified language is, and then the city council saying 30 days, this is big enough that people might want to move out of the city or make major changes to their house. It could be something very significant. It could require signage or building construction. I mean, if there's like something, a major ordinance or something that came across, then that would be nice to be able to have that full flexibility, but then also the detail. So I don't know the correct way to go about that, but I like each of the points that people are bringing up.
Thank you, Tony. And I think what I'm hearing from this group is that you would like all three. You would like to have 30 days captured in the charter, also a provision that directs to current state law, and then also something similar to the Beaverton ordinance charter language that speaks to allowing for whatever the ordinance says if it has a 45-day enactment rather than a 30-day enactment. Does that capture? I'm seeing everyone's nodding. Yeah, great. Shelby, does that give you the direction that you need?
Yep, that sounds good.
Take us to the next part.
All right, so our second, sticking with ordinances, our second consideration is whether we want to have one reading or two of ordinances. So Jason's laughing. So right now we have one reading of an ordinance. So what that means is that it's on the agenda. So members of the public look at it on the agenda, see that it's being discussed by City Council that night. There is a public hearing. There's an opportunity for public comment. And at the conclusion of that public hearing, the council will vote on the ordinance and it can be adopted that same night. Other cities require a 2-reading process, meaning that on the first night, it's noticed as a first reading. And so basically council just hears the title, depending on what the city charter says. Sometimes it's just read by title only. Sometimes it's a full hearing, but it is discussed once at that meeting, and then the meeting is closed and council doesn't take any action on it. Then they have to come back at a second meeting and they can only vote on it at that second meeting. So it provides both an opportunity for sometimes additional public comment, not all the time, but it significantly stretches out the ability of council to, the timeline, the ability of council to adopt an ordinance because it provides a second meeting. So it's generally at least 2 weeks with the public notice requirements. So Jason has strong feelings on this.
Please go ahead.
Well, so this is something that I'm going to put in the category of something that sounds like a good idea, that in practice, if you were to talk to city councilors or members of city councils in other jurisdictions that have this practice, they would probably cite this as one of the biggest impediments to progress and poor uses of their time in council meetings is this requirement. The other comment I will make about it is that almost always when we have something that is controversial, that lots of people want to talk about, we don't ever get it done in one meeting anyway. And there's a recognition that there needs to be opportunity for more input. Maybe we want to compel the council on those kinds of issues, but I think that a all-out, every single thing must go to double readings would be a mistake, in my opinion.
Thank you. John, please.
Yeah, I concur. I was going to wait until the end to speak, but since Jason spoke early, I'm trying to, in this whole thing, hear what the other, 9 people have to say before I give my really strong opinion. And I told you that at the very beginning. But as you know from the notes I gave you from the very beginning, this was one of the ones I said I would not stand to be changed. Now, if I got outvoted 9-1, I understand that. But it's one that I agree. Everybody else I talk to from all the other cities say, oh my gosh, you know, it lengthens our meetings, number one. It makes us have more meetings than we expected to have. Public doesn't understand when they're going to talk about it, because are we talking about it or are we voting on it? You know, you're confusing the public. I agree. Every time we've had an issue, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings if we need to take that for the thing. And we do. We'll keep the public record open. We'll keep the, you know, public comment open. You know, we'll do everything we can to make sure we get all the public input. I can't remember any time in the last 10 years where anybody said, oh man, you really shut us out and voted on something before you should have. Or, you know, we really wish you did it on the second vote. I agree with Jason. It sounds really good for the public, the longer you take. But at the same time, the public always says, government's too slow. Why are you being so slow? This is one way that Tigard's not slow like everybody else. We can actually get something done, and then we still have 30 days to wait because we just talked about it. So it's the kind of thing is, you know, Jason, we talk about this a lot. The sausage needs to get made, and the quicker we can make it, people can comment on it after that. And we still can make changes, but even in those 30 days, we can come back and make a change. So it's the kind of thing is it sounds like a really good idea and you're being more inclusive, but it's just a very lengthening process. And I think you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist.
Thank you, John. And I'm actually going to skip down our hands list a little bit because we haven't heard much from Lindsay tonight. So Lindsay, please.
Thank you. I was just going to say, you know, we have to remember too that the city councilors, the mayor, these are all elected officials. So it is in their best interest to make sure that what they're doing is what the general public wants. And of course, there's going to be, you know, the squeaky wheels that would like more time. But ultimately, you know, they're incentivized to hold more meetings if it's clear that there's a lot of controversy, you know, and it's divided and all these things. So I think this is one of those things where we just have to put our trust in the fact that these are elected officials and they're going to try to do their best to represent, you know, the people that elected them.
Thank you, Lindsay. And Nathan, please.
So I had a question that just came to mind. So I know on Planning Commission, basically, if it's the first time we're hearing something, if someone asks for a continuance, we have to grant it, more or less. Is that true of council as well? And how does that fit into this?
So that is not true for council. That is specific for land use hearings. And it applies both at Planning Commission and council for land use hearings, but only on land use hearings. So typically at council, if somebody wants to request additional time, it would be the entirely the discretion of the mayor and city council as to whether they wanted to allow it.
Okay, thank you.
And Zachary, please.
I don't know. I always like to lower my hand before I speak because I just want to like re-notify you whenever I raise my hand and lower it. Just I don't know. I've had a lot of experience with online stuff, but like I was gonna say, I feel like it should be taken into consideration, and maybe we could do a little bit of both. Whereas like we're thinking about some things like, oh, if it's a specific policy, we have one meeting where we talk about it, kind of like this, and the next meeting we kind of like vote on it, and then it's kind of aligned like closer together rather than like farther apart, because you don't want anything to get like missed out. So like if we can make some sort of like thing where it's like, oh well, it's at least a minimum of 2 meetings, but if it goes on for debate, then you can always sit on it for like longer.
Thank you, Zachary. And Karen, please.
Okay, school board will come out. I like 2 readings. The order of events of public hearing on the topic and then council clarifying questions and discussion doesn't allow for the public to then respond to that discussion. If it's all done in one night, just the order of things happening. I hear you guys saying efficiency. If the council only met once a month, I could totally see that being a problem and being slow, but there are weekly meetings, and that seems quick enough for me.
Thanks, Karen. And Margaret, please.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to listen to John and Jason on this one, at the idea of, I mean, people know before the meeting that they're going to be reading the, whatever the ordinance is. And, but I think they summarized it very well. I think Lindsay did a great job of summarizing kind of the idea of the city council is not stupid. They're not going to all of a sudden, when you've got 10 other people wanting to say something, say, okay, we're voting on it right now. They're not going to do that. So I think in many things like this, they've gone to second and third meetings anyway, but I don't think we need to have that written in the ordinance.
Thank you, Margaret. And Derek, please.
But yeah.
I think I'm going to echo the thoughts of Karen Emerson on this one, although I don't want to discount the years of public service for Jason and John Cook. There's no doubt that experience is certainly valuable through this process, but I think fewer than 20% of Tigard's population actually voted in this most recent election, based on my back of the napkin math. So we assume that the current slate of counselors and that of the prior one, benevolent as they were, are acting in the best interest of the public. That doesn't necessarily safeguard us from any sort of ramming of some sort of unpopular type of thing in the future. And having 2 readings, even if it delays the process by 1 additional week, I think is an appropriate safeguard for interested parties to show up and debate the matter.
Thank you, Derek. And Tony, please.
Since this is kind of, I guess, a constitution, kind of a guidance thing, is there a way that it could be put in there, a stipulation where that could be a triggering mechanism to kind of mandate an additional meeting if certain criteria are met, so that it's not an always thing, to kind of address the concerns about it being, every single time it's a hearing and then it's a vote and it's 2 different times. I mean, if it's something that nobody has any concerns about, then having that split and that additional redundancy doesn't seem necessary, because I think that's kind of addresses both of the concerns, because on one side it's, hey, if they're elected officials, they're not going to want to rock the boat too much. But on the other side, we see a lot of, at least I have seen a decent amount of evidence of councils completely ignoring public comment, and I found that kind of unpleasant to see. And yes, they can be voted out the next cycle, but you can have a whole lot of chaos and bad blood developed in a single election cycle. So I think if people felt heard and there was a mechanism so that they could feel like they could set this off, so that they could say, hey, I want this to be more than 1 meeting, then that might address both sides of that concern.
Thank you, Tony. And Shelby, I haven't seen in some of the charters that we've looked at any sort of trigger mechanism for longer discussion of ordinances. I don't know if you've seen anything like that.
No, I haven't. I was actually thinking if we wanted to do something like that, I would suggest that go in the ordinance that Karen was suggesting earlier, some kind of annual or something ordinance that really addresses how the City Council of Tigard adopts ordinances. I would have concerns putting it into charter, just because we can't possibly come up with an answer, a one-size-fits-all answer for the charter. And again, the charter is supposed to be a 50,000 foot level, and this is really a 5 to 10,000 foot level that we're talking about now. There's a huge range of items that council adopts ordinances on, and so they range from very straightforward, non-controversial code amendments. I mean, I'm thinking one of the code amendments that we did 3-ish years ago was actually to make it no longer a crime to whistle in Tigard public restrooms, because in the 60s that was actually a crime. And so we had in our code that it was not that it was a crime to whistle in public restrooms. And so, that is an example of the easiest, simplest, most non-controversial. I mean, granted, some people are bad whistlers, but the absolute non-controversial ordinance that we do. Other ordinances that I would be concerned about are land use ordinances. So under Oregon law, a land use case has to be decided within 120 days. Otherwise, the applicant has the ability to come in and basically have the state take over. So right now, when we're building our council schedules, we have to allow for an appeal period to be built in. And if we have a second reading of ordinances, that really reduces staff's time to be able to thoughtfully engage with the applicant and have a discussion and work on the land use case if we have to basically bring it to a hearing so soon in order to schedule a second reading of it. So because of the timeline, that would be an ordinance that I would be concerned about. So yeah, I think if there are certain things that, it's hard to just define controversial for purposes of writing a law. So I am concerned about just saying if it's controversial that it has to be a second reading, because that's very subjective. But I do think that if we want to get into that kind of policy level, that I would encourage that to be in a separate ordinance as opposed to in the charter itself.
Thank you, Shelby. And Carol, please.
Yeah, I agree with having that in a separate ordinance. We put this out, we put the information out for the meetings a week in advance. And to me, that gives people, I think, enough time to put this on their schedule, come in, talk about it. Council's going to listen to them during the public hearing. And I think there are so many that wouldn't need another week. It seems like all you're really doing is making people wait to come in and testify. So there might be a few things where it made sense to build in more time.
Thanks, Carol. So just to summarize, I'm hearing 3 points of view at this time. One being just how it currently stands, a single reading. A second one being having 2 readings, and the third being having one reading generally, and then having a council rules kind of set ordinance that provides for conditions and under which a second reading would be required. So just to summarize that. And Jason, please. Oh, Jason, you're muted.
Oh, I see. I took my hand down, but didn't unmute. Okay. All the mechanics of this. What I was going to share is just that a possible way of approaching the criteria might be if we need to head in that direction. I'm curious to see what City Attorney Rahala thinks about this. Would be a criteria of just saying if more than 2 people, for example, came to testify the first night, then it would need to go to a second reading. Just as a way of sort of gauging the level of public interest, or maybe there's a different number, but just conceptually, like if there's some actual bona fide interest, then sure, go for it. But if it's about whistling in the bathrooms, maybe not so much.
Shelby, does that pass the legal test?
Yeah, I think something like that could work. I would want to exclude land use cases because land use already has the ability to request a continuance.
That was part of what I was going to say the first time.
Okay.
Sorry. Yep.
Yeah. No, I was thinking the same thing. I think also build in that any counselor could propose it as well, because that's something I was thinking. If council is the one hearing it at the dais, give them the ability to say, you know what, I want a second reading on this. So I think we could look at a policy like that. But yeah, I mean, it's true that 2, it sounds like a really low number, but aside from land use cases, I honestly can't remember the last time that we had more than 2 people testify on an ordinance in Tigard.
Ridwell.
Yeah, true.
So the proposal that's on the table, it seems like a compromise, and I'd like specifically to hear from either Karen or Derek about how this passes your feelings, which would be that generally 1 reading, 2 readings if there is more than, let's say, 2 people from the public who have come to testify, or a counselor requests a second reading. So Karen or Derek, would either of you like to comment? Karen, please.
Yeah, putting language into an ordinance to allow for the exceptions that way, I can live with that.
I think actually we're talking about adding those exceptions just really into the charter.
I would,
Oh, is that not the suggestion?
I would prefer ordinance.
Oh, but ordinance.
Yeah, I think the level of detail we're talking about, I was thinking ordinance.
Yeah, I don't want language that says if 2 people testify in the charter.
Actually, I'm very relieved. Thank you. And John Cook, please.
Yeah, I want to clarify a few things. Number one is, yes, we had meetings every week, but they're not actually meetings every week we can vote on anything. So there's 2 general business meetings that we can actually vote on things. There will usually be a study session where voting doesn't happen. It's where we're talking about the items. So in actuality, those items have already come up. And so your idea of hearing everything twice, we did. If they're anything like that, they've already come up at a study session. And correct, we can't have people testify at a study session, but the public's heard about it. They've been notified about it. They know what we're going to talk about. So to me, and then there's usually a meeting on urban renewal or some other aspect. So those 4 meetings aren't like every week we can vote on something. We move it over. So it's like twice a month, just for clarification so people understand. We do meet every week, but you can't really vote on everything every week.
Thank you.
You can, but we don't want to go there. I just, and then back to the point, I'm not a big fan of saying 2 people. You know, I actually would be okay if you said 1 or 2 counselors. I would be okay with that. But you know, if one person shows up and they bring their spouse with them and they stand there and say, well, we're 2 people, I'm going to carry it over. That's not the same thing as sanctuary cities where we had 100 people standing there wanting to talk. That's not the same issue. And during sanctuary cities, we didn't vote the same night. So it's the kind of thing, if it's something big, we're not going to do it. So back to the talk where, you know, the counselors can just, I want to cover this 2 ways. Number one is, if you wait another week to vote and the counselors aren't listening to you, they're not going to change listening to you in that 1 week. Okay? If they're not listening to you, they're not going to listen to you the next time. And number 2 is, a lot of it, I'll try not to be pointing fingers, but Jason will know exactly what I'm talking about, is when you're actually trying to pass an ordinance, sometimes we talked about making sausage. Sometimes we just need to talk it out and get it done. There's nobody in the crowd even there that wants to hear it, but 1 or 2 of the counselors want to take it back home and they want to run it by their kitchen cabinet. Okay? The fact that they can't understand enough to figure out how to vote on something, or they don't understand what you're talking about, or they need to go home and talk to their wife about it first, that, or spouse, sorry, that should not be an issue to come back and have a second reading. And that happens over and over again. So I'm not even a big fan of if a counselor raises their hand, because Jason can name 3 counselors that would have done that.
Thank you all for this comment. I can tell that this is still a topic that we still have some hands up and we want to continue discussing. We are out of time for this evening. So Derek and Zachary, please jot down your comments. The proposal that we have on the table right now is to have keep the 1 week 1 reading enactment and then move forward with also a second ordinance. And we will pick up this conversation when we come back together February 13th. So looking forward into our schedule. So you're going to see this slide a lot. So we're on charter structure and concepts, which we accomplished this evening. Going forward, we will conclude our ordinances conversation as well as move forward into public improvements and debt limit. One of the things that Shelby, Jesse, and I are very committed to doing, similar to this meeting, is over-scheduling our meetings. So that way, if we do have time, we use all of the time. We go straight till 7:30 and take just full advantage of these 2 hours that you've gifted us twice a month. So we will be starting to prepare the conversation around the Willamette River and high capacity transit. And so I don't think we have time for a discussion about this evening, but I'd like to have a question that you can think about, and feel free to reach out to us with any comments that you have, is how would you feel most comfortable approaching that conversation? So we can keep it at the very high level of whether or not it is appropriate to have these slightly unusual, very policy-driven pieces in the charter. We can also, and we will, share information that has been developed by staff around these 2 issues. One being water supply. So when we talk about the Willamette River, the drinking water source, we're talking about our water supply, and the other being the transit master plan. Another option is that we can have staff come in specifically to brief in detail on those 2 areas. So it really is a conversation for this committee about how much detail and what level you want to be having that conversation in. So if you have a thought, an opinion about where you would like to see that conversation go, please reach out to me in this intervening time. I will remind you of this question and conversation in my usual Thursday email. So if you forget about it between now and then, you go and enjoy your dinner, don't worry about it. I will reach out to you all again on Thursday to hear about what you think about how you would like to approach those conversations. And just to conclude, our next meeting is actually going to be in 3 weeks, not 2 weeks, because we meet on the 2nd and 4th Mondays. Every once in a while, we will have a skip week. And so our next meeting will be February 13th. And John, please.
Kim, is there any way, changing subject totally, is there any way to maybe print out the last, I want to say 60 years, but maybe the 20 or 30 years worth of any charter change came forward that the public voted on? So the proposed change and then what the actual vote was. Because I looked up about the last 20 years worth today myself, but I think that's something good that if they had in front of them before we talked about some of these topics, it would be better for everybody.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
We'll look into that. Carol, can you and Jesse maybe take that on?
Yes, we can. We can provide that.
So we look forward to that. And Margaret.
It was just, I along John's line real quick. So when I looked at that, I go, what did this say originally that the voters voted it out? And so that was more of a curiosity thing. So I would love to have that if we can get it.
I can look into that for you.
Thank you.
Shelby, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to, going back to Kim's first point, we would plan to have guest speakers from our Public Works and Community Development Department next time, if that's something that you would be helpful or something that would be helpful to you. So if that's something, please let Kim know sooner rather than later so that we can ask them to make arrangements on their calendars. So
I would ask that when you get that Thursday email, if you have a direction that you would like us to go in, please let me know. And then one other scheduling note is it was mentioned before by a couple of folks that March 27th is actually spring break. So we have arranged, we're going to move that meeting earlier 1 week. So it will in fact take place on March 20th. We have a member who's on the Planning Commission. I've already talked to the staff liaison for the Planning Commission, so we should not have a conflict with that meeting. But we're keeping an eye on that. And then last thing is that this is our last meeting that we'll be doing in Teams. Going forward, we are moving to Zoom because in Zoom, we can successfully use breakout rooms and have smaller group conversations and more engagement with the entire group. And it's going to be a lovely experience. So going forward, all of those meetings are going to be in Zoom. I do apologize, Zachary, but we are out of time for this evening. I'm going to get everybody go at 7:30. So thank you very much for your time and have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Have a good couple of weeks.